Hey everyone, I'm here with Lindsay Sanchez for the first session of day 2 of jewelry settings 4 ways. We're going to be starting off with bezel setting, and we're just going to give a couple minutes for everybody to hop in and get settled. Feel free to pop your name and where you're tuning in from into the chat. I know we had lots of people from all over yesterday, and some people were watching the eclipse yesterday too. I know, Lindsay, you watched it yesterday too, right?
Yes, powerful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we'll just wait a couple minutes to let everybody hop on in. Just some housekeeping things. Please make sure to set your chat settings to everyone so that if you've got questions, we can all see them. And I'm going to give a little introduction of Lindsay right now. Lindsay Sanchez is an Austin-based jeweler. She's got over 20 years of experience making jewelry as well as teaching. So we're super excited to have her with us for this event and hopefully more in the future because she definitely knows what she's doing. And we're going to be covering bezel setting this morning. So she's prepared a really great pre-recorded demo for you guys. And we'll get that playing over here in a couple minutes. And if you have any questions for Lindsay during the video or after, feel free to pop them into the chat. Anything to add, Lindsay, before we get started?
No, just thank you, Sylvie. Thank you, Halstead. I'm super honored to do this, and especially to show bezel setting, because that's the setting that I do the most of and probably have taught the most. For the last 15 plus years, I've been teaching kids to adults how to do bezel setting and basic metalsmithing classes. And so it is one that I feel really pretty confident in. I do it in my studio a lot. So what you're going to see is kind of an everyday thing here in my studio. I will add, because it's the teacher in me, that I did do a pretty extensive handout. So it does have step by step. It has all of the materials listed, as well as suggested tools and supplies. So something to
Yes.
check out after.
Thank you for mentioning that. So with all of the sessions, you'll find PDFs attached to each one with the materials used, but Lindsay was amazing and made a whole handout of exactly how to do that. So if you click into Lindsay's session and scroll down a little bit, you'll see the handouts attached to the session, and you can download those. And this session will be recorded, so you'll have access to recordings for 30 days after the event. So you can rewatch it as many times as you need. And as well, we also have the coupon code running, SETSTONES15. So if you want to order anything that Lindsay used, you can use that through April 20th. So I am going to share my screen and get Lindsay's video playing, and we'll get started. And then, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat for Lindsay. Let's get going.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lindsay Sanchez here in my home studio near Austin, Texas. We're going to be talking about bezel setting for round and oval stones. Let's get to it. So today we're going to discuss 2 different ways to approach bezel setting for a cabochon stone, which is essentially a stone with a flat back and then a rounded top. We will start out with using pre-made bezel cups from Halstead, which is an excellent choice for teeny tiny stones, makes your life easier. And then we also have the larger stone. We will actually make the bezel wire and a back plate for that. So let's dive into reasons why to use a pre-made bezel. First, it's a great way to start. Maybe you're just now starting to set some stones, and this is just kind of an easy way to get your hands on all the stone setting tools. Also, when you have stones tiny, such as these 4mm and 6mm, these are essential and cut down on time, especially if you're wanting to produce a lot of the same work. You're making a bunch of stud earrings, or you're making stacking rings. These are great ways to do that. I also really love them if maybe you got your big center stone that you've made a bezel wire for, but you just want to add a little extra something. Halstead has two great options for bezel cups as far as style goes. You can go with plain, which is a straight edge, or we have the serrated, which has like these little teeth here, which is what was used on this one. So what I'm going to do today with y'all is I have some prefabricated ring shanks, and I am going to solder one of these bezel cups to the rings to kind of show you an example of stacking rings. So we will solder that together, and then I will also set the stone in this one, and then we'll set our stone inside of the post earring as well. So to prepare my bezel cups, I have them here on a charcoal block. That's just my preferred soldering surface, but like a soldering board or brick works as well. So we're going to turn them over. In order to attach them to a ring shank, we're pretty much doing like a sweat solder technique. So I'm going to go ahead and flux and add medium solder, because I used hard solder on my ring shanks, and medium solder will flow at a lower temperature than hard, so we can protect our ring shank. So let's go ahead and add our flux. I'm going to cut 2 pieces of medium solder. Since they're so tiny, I really only need 1 piece of solder for each. I'm not going to put it on there right now because I want to let that flux burn off a little bit before I put it on there so it doesn't bubble off. So I'm going for somewhat bushy flame, not too much hiss, a little bit of a longer inner cone here. And we're just going to start off by burning off the flux. Let it kind of bubble. And notice I'm not staying directly on top of it. I'm kind of pulling back whenever I see it to start to glow red, just again so we don't get too hot. Going to ball up my medium solder, get it on my pick, and then go back to heating until that solder completely flows and kind of puddles out. Okay, I'll get a little bit closer for this next one. So again, let the flux kind of get past that white bubbly stage. Don't stay on there for too long so it doesn't get too hot. Pick up our solder, place it on the back, and just go until it flows. Okay, so now we're going to attach these two together. I got my bezel cup with solder on the back side here, and then my ring shank. And I did create a little bit of a flat spot with my file in order to have a seat for my bezel cup. Setting that upside down here. Turn this in the correct way. I'm using my third hand. My flux. Okay, so similar flame, don't need something too hot, but just a little bit hotter, so it's a little bit of a longer inner cone. I can kind of hear the flame hissing a bit more now. And what I'm focusing on right now is not necessarily right at that bezel cup, but heating the entire thing. I even kind of heat down at the soldering surface. So again, heating the entire thing, keeping quick movements, going from side to side. And what I'm looking for is that solder to make a nice little line between the ring shank and the bezel cup. And I believe I see it. It's starting to glow. Go ahead and turn the torch off. But basically I can see there's like literally a silver lining right here and right here to show that they have attached. So it's come out of the pickle, but now at this point I want to do everything that I want to do to the metal before I set my stone. I want to file and sand if necessary. If I want to go ahead and give it a patina, polish it, or run through the tumbler, I always do before I set the stone, just to make sure that my stone is protected, because not all stones can go through that process. Speaking of gemstones, one of my recommendations is Lucidity Gemstones. They're located in Oregon. They have a beautiful selection. I got these for my bezel cups. I really appreciate that when you order from them, in your notes as you order, you can write, please make sure these are calibrated because they're going into bezel cups, which is super important when you are trying to fit a stone into a bezel cup, is that it is calibrated. Now, while the ring is tumbling and getting polished up, I'm going to show you how to set this post earring to match this one here. All right, before we start setting, I'm going to show you my stone setting tools. So here I have, which is called a bezel pusher. It has just a flat side here. I will say when you get them, here's the brand new one. It's got very sharp edges and corners. You can see the difference here. What I do, because I find that these can sometimes mar up your metal, I'll actually take it to like a belt sander and some fine sandpaper and take down those corners and those really like right angles. So bezel pusher, then the rocking bezel, which we won't be using for this tiny one, but we will on the bigger one. And then your burnisher, I prefer the one that has this little curve to it. So now I'm going to set the stone, and if you dare, this is a brand new bench pen, but I went ahead and went for it, and I drilled a hole here because I like to have a nice seat for when I'm setting my stones and earrings. Just to make sure that it's nice and flat and it can kind of wiggle around as you go. So first step is getting my stone into there, and when something is so tiny, it does help if you can have a little aid. So what I use is just some sticky wax. This is just like sprue, red sprue wax, but also what works really great are those little cheeses that have the red wrapper on them, the Babel, I think is how you say it. If you start saving some of that works just as well. So now I'm warmed it up with my hands. I'm gonna grab my stone and I'm gonna set it down. I'm gonna try to go straight in. Got it in here. I'm gonna start with my bezel pusher. And these are meant to be held where it's mostly here in the palm of your hand. Whoop. And then you have your hands going like so with your pointer finger and your thumb to help guide. So we're going to start with opposite. So I like to think north, south, east, west. And then we're going to go northwest, southeast. So this is a good place to start, thinking of those directions. And then you can see now where I have these areas. I'm going to push those in. And it's more of a, I'm coming in very perpendicular and then kind of rolling up. And I go the opposite, perpendicular, and then kind of rolling up, making sure I keep my control and I'm not slipping. And then at this point, you know, you just start going around to fill those gaps. Staying opposite when you can, but you know, we're just filling gaps now. And these bezel cups are pretty easy to set. So I got that mostly there. And then I'm gonna come in with my burnisher, and I'm gonna go kind of from the side for y'all to see, but this is more of a rub motion. And you're kind of right up on top, like at a 45-degree angle or so. And since I have metal right here, burnishers, they can sometimes make like a nice little line that you would have to go back and polish. So if I want to avoid, going back over my steps, I can use, since I've kind of modified this, I can use the end of this as a burnisher and do that same motion of like pushing in and rubbing to really lay down that bezel wire, bezel cup. Pushing inward to really secure that stone. Looks good. Okay, look at her shine. So now we're gonna go ahead and set the stone, and I'm gonna grab my stone with my red sticky wax, and she just falls right in. And I like to look at it from, this angle and make sure there's not one side sitting higher than the other. This one looks good. So now you might be wondering, how am I gonna hold the ring? If you don't have anything fancy, you can always just put it on the end of your bench pen, or you can use your ring clamp. There's a flat side and a rounded side. I like the flat side and get it pretty much flush here with the top and put in your wedge to hold it. And I'll show you another way to hold your pieces when we set our larger stone. So now we're gonna go back to our, opposite sides, north, south, east, west. And I find that the serrated are much easier to push over because there's less material here because it's got those little hills and valleys. So I'm just working on opposites and making sure all my points are laying down. And then I'm gonna go back over it with my burnisher, which is rubbing with pressure all around. And again, this makes such a great stacking ring. You could make several of these. And then you could have just regular wire rings that are paired with it. I'm gonna check the fit. So now you have a cute little stacker ring. And now we're going to move on from doing the bezel cups to making our own bezels. And that is gonna require us wrapping a stone with bezel wire and making a back plate, and I'll show you more. All right, so say you have a larger stone or a stone that's not a perfect circle or oval, and you cannot find a pre-made bezel for that particular stone, you're gonna make your own one. And that is what we're gonna do right now. We're gonna create the bezel, which is essentially the wall that is right here around the stone. And then we're gonna have a back plate. Another stone recommendation for y'all is turquoise mousse. And I do have all of their information on the handout that is included with this session. And of course they are known for their turquoise, but they have a lot of other great color stones and so many different rose cuts and then smooth cuts. So I highly recommend turquoise mousse. So in order to move forward with this labradorite, I need to find a bezel strip that is the right height. So they do come in all different heights, as you can see, like 1/8, 3/16, 1/4. If you're ever unsure what size you're gonna need, you can have multiple available, or what I like to do is get like the thickest that I usually need, and then you can trim it down. And I probably will actually have to do that with this stone, and I'll show you why. Another thing to consider is this is plain bezel wire, but there's also, again, the serrated, and sometimes you can find scalloped, which is more of like kind of it looks almost like a flower motif once it's all said and done. So we're going to lay our cabochon on a flat surface. So I'm using my steel block, and then we are going to line up our bezel wire and kind of check the height. So a good rule of thumb is it comes up about 2/3 of the way. As you can see with the cabochons, there's always a point where it's more straight and then it starts to curve over. You want your bezel wire to be sitting just right above that curve. So there's enough material to go over it and to hold it in, but we don't want so much that it just totally engulfs the stone, and we don't want it to be too little because it's a possibility that it could fall out. So we're finding that happy medium, which I find is about 2/3 of the way up. So this one is kind of right at that curve, but I feel like there's still I feel like there could be a little bit more that comes up over it. So we're gonna try the taller one. And then this one you can see pokes out quite a bit. And if we're imagining it being folded over, see if I can get this visible. Once all said and done, it might be a little too much. So I want to trim this down just a tad. So I'm gonna get set up for that, and then we will trim this so that it's a good height for this stone. So I figured out how much that I need to trim off, and I have my straight edge here. If I had dividers, that would be even better because I could open up my dividers and then just run along the side of that, and it'll make a nice even line here. I just don't have any in my studio. So I am using this, and I'm gonna take off just the smallest amount. But as we all know, just the tiniest amount of metal can make a big difference. So with my scribe, I'm gonna go down, and then I have some nice sharp shears, and with a steady hand, I'm gonna cut along that line. And bezel wire, or also known as bezel strip, is so thin. I think this is 28 gauge, so super simple just to do with some shears. Next thing we do is we're going to wrap our stone. So I always want to make sure that this end is straight so that it's going to meet up with the other end. And when I have an oval, I like to start on the straight side just because it's easier to match up your ends with this longer side. And I'm going to just hold that piece back there and tightly wrap my bezel wire around the entire stone. Again, I am pulling tight to make sure that there's not any gap, and hold it up. Right where there is overlap, I'm going to make a mark right there. So I want to cut it exactly so it's meeting up. The two ends are kissing. Holding it tight as I do that. And just make sure that you are cutting evenly. Now don't be discouraged if you cut it too short or too long. That's just kind of part of the game. And the more that you do it, you know, the better that you will be at matching up the ends. All right. Once I have, checked the fit around the stone once again, then I need to bring these two ends together. So when we do bring the two ends together, it may deform the shape just a bit, but that's okay because we just want our ends to be flush in order to solder it together. After it's soldered, we'll push it back over the stone so it'll regain that shape. So what I do is just use some flat nose pliers, and I just barely kind of push it down to almost give it more of like a tabletop here. And then we're gonna do a little bit of over under to build some tension until it kind of clicks in. And you can almost hear that click when it does. We're gonna look out for this. So you still see that I have one side is higher than the other. So I'm gonna continue working it until it's nice and flush. We don't want to see that on the final piece. We want it to look like one continuous wall, bezel wall. So that looks good. And then soldering on a soldering board this time. I like it because it's nice and flat. Use 1 piece of hard solder, and I'm going to flux. I'm just fluxing the area that we're going to solder, which is the seam. And then I'm going to place my piece of solder. I have wire solder up underneath. And I just put it right underneath the seam. It doesn't matter which direction it is going. The reason that I put it underneath is I find that it's much easier than trying to balance it. Say if this was going up, trying to balance it on here because it could slide off. I also find that it's much easier to mount your bezel wire when it's in this position because it has so much airflow, it gets hot quick, so it can melt. So I have more success by placing the solder just right underneath. And then I'm going to be heating it from the top with a nice small bushy flame. And solder follows heat, right? So as this begins to flow, it's going to follow the heat, which is up that seam. And my little bezel wire will actually drop down a little bit. I like to call it the gravity trick. So when I see it drop, then I know that I have soldered that seam. What I'm doing is focusing on heating the entire piece. So I'm kind of going around the outside, do little circles on the inside. It's like you're following a line around your bezel wire with your flame, and I'm not getting too close to that inner cone. I'm about halfway on the flame here. And we're just going around and around. You'll notice that the flux burned away. We don't have that white bubbly action there anymore. It's the silver is actually starting to glow, and it'll be almost like a red pink color right before it flows. And we're just continuing to go around, go on the inside. There she goes. I don't know if you can see here, but the solder, it went all the way up to the top. So we're done. Another thing I do to check that it went all the way is I will look at it from the back side, and you can see on the inside here that the solder went all the way through and up. So I'm going to quench this, and then I'm going to push it back over my stone. So now we're going to check for fit, because we want to make sure before we go too far ahead that this actually is going to fit. So I'm going to push it over the stone, and it should be a nice snug fit. But what I do like to do is almost push it through from the back side, because ultimately, you can check from the top too, ultimately we're gonna have a back on that, right? So you can't just push it over. You wanna make sure that it's actually going to be able to fit coming in from the top, in which it does. If for some reason it had, you know, maybe it was too big, it had a little extra room and you could see some light around here. I like to look at it from the back too. If it was too big, then you would just cut it, and then you would try to fit again, cut it so that it is flush and redo it. If it was too tight, you can stretch it, hit it over a mandrel or a ring mandrel very lightly. You don't want to thin it out too much. If it's just a smidge, you can stretch it. You can even stretch it just by pushing over your stone a few times if your stone isn't super soft. So next steps, I do like to, as I'm figuring out my design, and you probably have your design before you hit the metal, but we're kind of just winging it here. I like to keep my stone inside my bezel for as long as I can, just to make sure that I do keep that shape, and I'm measuring my back plate correctly. So again, the back plate, it's a sheet of metal here, and we're going to attach the bezel wire to that. This one is shown with the bezel plate cut all the way up to it after the fact, after it is soldered, or you can keep a little extra metal around the edge, kind of like a frame here. So this is your bezel wire, and then this is the back plate extended off the edge. I will say if you do decide to extend it off the edge, I would go with sheet metal that is no less than 22 gauge. If it's like 24 gauge or 26 gauge, this just becomes like a nice sharp edge. And you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that it's comfortable and that it won't bend. And then you can opt the option of cutting out the back, and sometimes you can find some nice little surprises. If you're really good with the saw, you could cut out some cool designs, or you could just keep it enclosed to keep it simple like this one. I like to open the back if you have a stone that looks really nice with some light coming through it. It also is great when you're setting the stone. If for any reason you need to push it out because it didn't quite sit in there right, then you have a way of popping it out quick and easy. I'm going to give myself some extra working space. I'm not going to actually cut that back plate up to the edge quite yet. I'm going to do since I have an oval, it's basically like a rectangle. Solder that down, then we cut it. I am going to go ahead and add a little bezel cup because I still have one with some solder on the back, and I can sweat solder that all at the same time as I attach this bezel wire. So with my scribe, I'm going to go right about there. And again, leave a bit of a lip. Think about what your overall design is going to look like, and you'll know about how much metal you need to leave on the edge. I'm going to go ahead and cut that, and then I will set it up for soldering. More thing before soldering, the back plate I have nice and flat, and then you always want to double check yourself. You can see it's around the edges here. It looks nice and flush like when I push it down, but right here at the seam there is a little bit of a gap right here, just because these didn't line up quite correctly. So I want to file that down before I try to go and solder that, because solder does not like to fill gaps. So what I do for that is I just get a flat piece of sandpaper, 220 or 320 grit, and I just cut out a little bit. I'm going to push my stone out, and then with even pressure, I'm going to do, you can either do circles or a figure 8. Over. And now, so we're ready for soldering, and this is going to be our soldering setup for attaching the back plate. We have a tripod here, and I prefer the heavy mesh screen just because it does last longer. And whenever we do put our back plate and our bezel wire, and in this case our bezel cup, we're going to make sure that it is within this ring and not on top of that, because we're going to be heating from directly below. Okay, so as I said, I keep the stone in my bezel wire for as long as possible, just so that it doesn't get misshapen. So now that we are ready, I'm going to carefully push it out, and then I'm going to apply flux. Okay, so I just apply it to the back plate. I use what's called Aquaflux. That's good for silver and for gold, but Handy Flux works just as well. It's just what I've gotten used to through the years. It's what we used at the schools that I would teach at, and so that's just been my go-to. All right, so I'm going to make sure that it is positioned correctly. And then if you recall, whenever I soldered the bezel wire, I used a hard solder. So now I'm going to move to medium solder, because medium solder will flow at a lower temperature than hard. So that's going to protect my hard solder seam. It won't get hot enough for that to pop open, because that is always a possibility. So whenever you are soldering multiple times, it's good to move from hard to medium, and easy if necessary. I've cut about 5 small pieces of solder for a stone this size. I want to make sure that it is actually touching the bezel wire and the back plate, like it's seated right up in these little seams. All right, so we're gonna get started with soldering. This is a bigger flame because this is a bigger piece of metal. So you'll notice the inner cone, it's closer to like 3/4 of an inch. And then this is just like a bit of a longer flame, and I can hear a little bit of hiss behind it. For me, I've found that find that right temperature by listening to my torch. And, you know, everyone creates a relationship with their torch. Every torch is a little bit different. So you just gotta keep playing, keep making. So at this point, I'm moving in circles. I want to heat the entire piece. I'm burning away that flux. The flux is going to start out white and bubbly. Some of my solder pieces may have moved. They look to stay pretty much. I see one there. Once I get past this white bubbly stage and it's more like a glossy look, the entire piece, then I'll go in to push that back with my solder pick. You'll notice that the metal is changing too. It's starting to turn kind of like a pink color. I can get in here and move that up against. Make sure I don't sit in one spot too long. So I'm just moving around, constant circle, make sure I'm not getting one side heated more than the other, and I'm waiting for that solder to flow. And once I see an entire silver lining, and I like to see it on the outside edge, then I know I'm good. If for any reason you find that there's one side that's lifting, it's very obvious. It'll be a very dark spot that you know, okay, that needs to be held down. You can use your pick. I really like this pick that I have here because it has a flat edge and you can just kind of gently push it down. Not a lot, just enough to get that solder to flow in that area. Okay, so that is my bigger bezel is definitely soldered down. This one, I'm gonna focus a little bit more on here. Yes, I can see the solder there. All right. This is where we're at. I'm gonna pickle and then we're gonna cut out our back plate. So this is out of the pickle, and this is the point where I check to make sure that I don't have any gaps. And one way that I do that is I'll hold it up to a light and kind of rub my finger behind it. And if I see some light coming through, then I know that I need to go back and solder again. You can also see where some of this solder was. So I could have kept the heat on a little bit longer or even just used less because it all went around. So I didn't necessarily need these, but they are super flat. So I'm not worried about it, like, messing up with the integrity of where the stone will be sitting for it to move around. It's like basically flat. So what I'm going to do next is cut this out. You can use your jeweler's saw. If it's thin metal, then you could use your shears. Just make sure we're filing afterwards. Since I'm not doing anything intricate and this is 24 gauge, I am using just, again, these really sharp Lindstrom shears. I only use these on sheet metal just to keep them nice and sharp. So I'm cutting here, but when I get to this where I know I want it to look like seamless, where I'm gonna not have any extra metal hanging off, get as close as you can. Support your bezel wire by keeping your thumb inside of it. And obviously not so close that you're going into your bezel wire, but like as close as you can to cut down on filing and sanding. Hand tools, I always start with the largest tool first. In this case, it is my file. And in order to get it nice and flush, I'm gonna go follow the contour of this bezel, and I'm applying pressure and I'm going in a forward motion. And I'm keeping my thumb inside of my bezel wire. Again, I want to support that as much as I can. I'm also working on my seam. As you can see here, it's already starting to disappear. So you can already see a difference. This right here is starting to look like just one continuous piece of metal, and then this you can still see the two parts. So I'll make my way all the way around. And once I do that, we'll go to the next. I'll show you one of my favorite tools whenever I'm trying to get the metal down close to my bezel and to really blend these edges is this Snap-on sanding disc. So it is a snap mandrel, this guy, and then these come in coarse, medium, and fine. For this one to really take off material, I'm using the coarse, and then I can go to the medium to kind of soften it all up. And I handle my piece the same way, where I'm holding it from the inside of the bezel. But whenever you do it, it's like kind of right about here. If you do here, that's doing nothing, right? So right about here. And I'm not doing my final cleanup and polish right now. I'm just trying to get it, you know, pretty close to where I want it to be, because I'm going to attach a ring to this. So it's going to be a lot harder once it's on a ring shank. It's much easier to work with while it's still flat. So I am done filing and sanding the edges so that it looks like one continuous piece of metal here. You can no longer see exactly where that back plate and the bezel wire meet. So I'm going to attach my ring shank now, and I wanted to show you the setup. Similar to what we did before, we have the third hand. It is facing upside down. I have my flux, and I have one piece of solder on each twist. This is my twist band. And I am going to heat it where I'm heating the biggest piece of metal, which again is my back plate. So I'm gonna focus my flame just right around there. And then once my flux starts to burn away and my metal is starting to glow a little bit red, then I will kind of focus in through the ring shank to get that solder to flow up underneath here. So out of the pickle. So now, just like we did before, you're going to finish off your metal completely however you want to do it. That's when you're going to do, if you find you need to do any extra sanding or filing, like along the back here. You'll also do your patina, your polish, and your tumble. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then we're going to set these two stones. Okay, so it's come out of the tumbler. I added a little bit of liver sulfur just because I really like that look. And now what we're gonna do is set the stone. So since this is not like your typical ring shank, you don't wanna put it in a ring clamp because that could squish it. So we're gonna use Jet Ballistic, which I will show closer up here in a little bit, but these little beads here, we're gonna put it in warm to hot water, and that is going to mold into like a little protective cushion to hold this, and we're gonna hold it in the vise. There was a really great video that Sylvie did not that long ago, so if we can find a link to that, that's a really great resource as well. Okay, again, this is hot water. But see how all these little beads are now, as it stays warm, I can now set it inside here to kind of protect my ring. I may even do some more, see if it's still warm enough. But I'm getting it so it's like up underneath and supporting that back plate and wrapped around my ring shank, just so that, yeah, see, my water cooled down pretty quickly. I think this is good though. Just enough to where I'm not gonna squish my ring. And I'm gonna put this in my vise. See, like that? And just so y'all know, this does harden once you have it on there. So this is pretty hard. It's still a little bit malleable, so that's how I'm able to compress that in there. But I put it in there so that I got this resting on the top, and then my ring shank is there, but it's not getting squished, and this is really pretty secure. So I'm going to use the same tools that we used earlier. So we're going to start with the bezel pusher with the square face, and then we are going to go into the rocking bezel, the bezel rocker, and then the burnisher to finish off. I'm gonna start with the big one. So after you've handled your piece for a while, it's not out of the ordinary that your bezel wires got it a little wonky, and mine has a bit, as you can see. So what I do to ensure that this is going to pop in with ease is actually take my burnisher, and with that curved edge I just do a light pressure. I'm not flaring it out, I'm just straightening it back up all around, just so that I'm not running into that bezel wire as I'm trying to push in my stone. Whoop, there she goes. That one went in nice and easy. Okay, so we're gonna go with our opposite corners, north, south, east, west. One thing I also want to note too is if before you set it in there, if you think, oh man, my bezel wire actually does look too tall now that I'm ready to put my stone in. Two things that you can do. You can sand that down as long as you're careful of the other things happening in your jewelry piece. Or if you want to lift your stone, that's not out of the ordinary. One thing that I was taught at Be Golden Jewelry School when I was teaching there is we would use silica. And that was suggested because silica does not retain moisture. Because if you think about it, something with like cardboard, if you're wearing it in the shower, such it could get kind of funky. So you can add a little bit of silica underneath there, and that will raise the stone just a bit so that your bezel height is just right. So let's begin. And I'm keeping it horizontal, pushing in, and kind of rolling up. If you have a vise that swivels, that's even better. On opposite sides. Another reason why I like to do opposite sides, especially with a bigger stone, is you want to make sure that your stone is staying seated and centered, and you're not pushing on one side and it's kind of shoving that stone over to that side. You always want to be mindful of the type of stone that you're setting too, and the softness, and if they're vulnerable to scratching. If they are, I love to put some painter's tape. Just put little pieces of painter's tape right here on the top. So if you do slip, you are protecting your stone. So I'm working on getting all these little creases pushed in. And this is the point when you're like, oh man, it's not looking too good. But once it's all said and done and they have it pushed in, it's gonna be beautiful. Okay, now the tool that I love to really kind of roll out and rock out these bumps is the bezel rocker. So this is the one that is a bit easier to slip on, so you just want to make sure that you have good control, and the motion that you are making with it is literally a rock. So you start kind of here at this point, imagine this is your bezel wire, and you add pressure as you rock it forward. So I'm starting here, get closer. I'm gonna start on this longer side so it's easier to see. Start there and rock. And see how it smooths that out. That's so much better. And rock. And you can use this to push as well. I see people do that all the time. I have a steel one, but they also come in brass, which is even better because those are softer and they won't mar up your metal. And then for me, just because I'm right here, I want to be careful with this. It's a little bit easier for me to come in with this guy to get that area just because this has a smaller face. So what I'm working on right now is laying it down and securing it. against the stone. And notice how you can sometimes go back and forth between your stone setting tools. It's already looking much nicer. So now we're gonna go in with the burnisher. And this is when we really start to lay it flat. So I kind of rubbing it right about here at an angle on the top of my bezel to secure it. Best way to know if it's secure is if you feel or hear a little wiggle. But this one's looking pretty good. I'm going to do the same thing as we did before with the bezel cups. Use the wax to set it in there. Stick with the blues, those complement each other. And when we're running into this where we got two bezels close to each other, I'm probably going to mostly use this one just because it's a little bit smaller and easier to handle in these tight spaces. So I'm continuing to go opposite. And again, adding, these pre-made bezel cups, it's going to add some value to your work because now we have this little aquamarine added in there. And to get in between here even more, I'm going to use just this tip just to kind of roll it across. There she goes. So I'm going to set this back into warm water, which will make it, or really hot water. You do have to get it pretty hot. I use a tea kettle to get it to the temperature that I wanted, and that will make it soft again so that I can take that off. And the last thing I'm going to do is just show you the wheel that I like to use on my flex shaft to really soften up and finish off around the bezel. All right, so the last thing that I'm going to do is go over it with a green pumice wheel. I really love this because sometimes your burnishers can leave kind of an uneven look around the edge, and this can really just kind of make everything more uniform. And it is really like soft enough to where you don't have to worry too much about it touching your stone. So, and it's on a screw mandrel. Again, the green pumice wheel, and I just kind of go here at an angle. I think it just finishes it off so nicely. Do you see this versus this? Do you see the difference? And I only need like 1 or 2 passes. Oops. Well, we made some beautiful things all in 1 hour. This is basic bezel setting, but I do hope that you got some pointers or at least some inspiration to add some stones or some pre-made bezel cups to your designs in the future. Thank you.
Okay, Lindsay, that was amazing. Thank you so much. I am just going to pop a link to the pumice wheels into the chat real quick.
I love the pumice wheels. I use them a lot for that.
They're awesome for that. And they're really nice because they're not super aggressive. So they're pretty safe with a lot of stones, right?
Yes, they are. I mean, and it's always good to kind of stay off of it. And if you're worried about your stone, you can again do kind of a painter's tape situation on top. But I feel like this is the one that you can have near that stone. So
For sure. We did have one question that was wondering about hot water and your stones. Like, is that something that you should be worried about when you're remelting the jet set?
I mean, I think it's always good to know, the properties of the stones that you're working with. It is a soft stone, but I try to not like totally submerge the whole thing in the water. I literally will take it like I'm holding it with the waters here and just kind of, as it gets, gets loose, then you take it off of the metal part so you don't have it sitting in that hot water. Because yeah, you always just want to be careful with your stones.
Yeah, for sure.
Like-
I think probably most stones are okay unless you're using something porous.
Right.
So like turquoise, you
Yes.
want to be mindful of certain types of opal. Yeah, like Lindsay said, any of your softer stones are things that you might want to think twice about, but otherwise,
Just like a good option, because maybe you don't have like a a big fancy thing to hold your rings or something. And that's a very economical way to hold your piece, and then you can find a cheap vise, and there you go.
yeah. I mean, we swear by that here by Jet Set here in the Halstead studio because we don't have a fancy GRS setting system or anything, and it really makes setting those uneven bands like so easy. It's amazing. Do we have any other questions for Lindsay today? I know we answered a lot of them in the chat already, but if we've got any more, feel free to pop them in.
And again, like you have the step-by-steps in the PDF. When I filmed this, I filmed much longer than I needed because I'm used to teaching in person, so I keep talking. So it was a little choppy in parts, but it is, yeah, definitely step-by-step that you can refer to for a long time.
Yeah, and we've got the video recording as well. That's up for 4 weeks, so feel free to go back in and watch this again. Lindsay had lots of great little tips popped in there just for in general metalsmithing. So definitely watch the recording if you tuned in late or just kind of want to rewatch the way that she does any of this. But if we don't have any questions, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was amazing. There was
Thank you.
jam-packed with great information and you could see everything so clearly. And we really appreciate you making that handout as well. We've got John's presentation on intro to lapidary coming up in about a half an hour. So join us for that and we'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye.